Getting ready for machine learning interviews can feel overwhelming. There's behavioral interviews, coding interviews, and even system design interviews. This can all leave aspiring or even experienced machine learning practitioners scratching their heads and asking the question, what do I even need to do to prepare? In this video, I'll give you a clear roadmap so that you know exactly what to study, how to prepare, and how to walk into your interviews with confidence. This roadmap will apply regardless of whether you're interviewing for data science roles, machine learning engineering roles, whether you're interviewing at a small startup, or at a FAANG-sized large tech company. Let's break it down. First, you're going to want to decide which role you're interviewing for. Are you interviewing for a data science role or for a machine learning engineering role? Both roles have slightly different interview processes, so it's best that you know which role you're applying for. Next, you're going to want to understand the structure of your interview. If you have an interview coming up with a company, it's very important that you talk to your recruiter or your hiring manager and find out the exact interview timeline and process. Typically, most large companies are going to have a phone screen, usually lasting about 60 minutes, where they will ask you some questions about your resume and also ask you to complete a technical question. And you're going to have a final round interview. A final round interview typically consists of some coding questions and some open-ended problem-solving questions in the form of either a machine learning engineering system design interview or a data science case study interview. More on that later. The final round also will usually include a behavioral interview, which is usually non-technical. At smaller companies, the roles of data science and machine learning engineer are often blended, so the interviews might look very similar here. Smaller companies or startups will often give you take-home assignments. Final round interviews at startups and smaller companies will usually look similar to the larger tech companies, where you're going to have some behavioral and some open-ended questions and maybe even some coding questions. Regardless of which company you're interviewing for, make sure you confirm with your recruiter or hiring manager what exactly the interview structure looks like and what questions you can expect. In some cases, it also helps to search for your company's interview process. Websites like igotanoffer.com are really helpful in this domain. Regardless of format, many interviewers will often ask you probing questions to analyze how well you understand your machine learning fundamentals. Examples of these kinds of questions can include: explain the bias versus variance trade-off. How does gradient descent work? How do you deal with an imbalanced data set? What benefits do LSTMs provide to RNN? In what cases should we use regularization? And can you describe the pros and cons of regularization techniques? The best way to be prepared to answer all these questions is to actually have a very solid understanding of machine learning itself. Before even thinking about applying for ML roles, here are the fundamentals that you're going to want to go over and have covered really well. For math, you're going to want to have solid understanding of linear algebra, particularly how matrices work, Calculus 3, in particular how gradients work and partial derivatives, and probability, particularly the basics of probability, your basic distributions, and how modeling works. You're going to obviously want to have a good grasp of machine learning. This includes how gradient descent works, and also classical algorithms like your basic linear regression, logistic regression, support vector machines, decision trees, random forests, dimensionality reduction, and the basics of deep learning. You're going to want to understand how backpropagation works. If you're applying for data science roles, you're also going to want to have a very good understanding of statistics. And if you're applying for machine learning engineering roles, you're going to want to have a good grasp of algorithms and data structures. Some roles are going to require that you have specialty knowledge. This will usually be specified in the job description. If this is the role you're applying for, you're going to want to know the specialty. This can be natural language processing for LLM-specific roles, computer vision for computer vision roles, and even reinforcement learning. When studying these topics, really take your time to make sure you get a good grasp of them. There's no rush, and remember, it's not a race. And of course, try to enjoy this material. When studying this stuff, solve a lot of math and machine learning problems. Build projects. Apply as much of what you learn as possible. That way you can get a really good grasp of these concepts and the real world applications. And if you're struggling with the learning process, that's okay, keep going. In this case, I recommend a book called A Mind for Numbers. It will teach you actually how your brain learns math. And this is a great book for anyone who just wants to better understand how to learn. If you landed a machine learning interview, then hopefully you already have the fundamentals down. In that case, you definitely do not need to take all these classes. However, before your interviews, it's always a good idea to brush up on the common machine learning interview questions. I'll link some resources in the description below. A very common interview format for most machine learning engineering roles and some data science roles is the famous coding interview. These are typically 40-minute interviews where you will have to answer an algorithm-style question, where, given a problem, you're going to have to 1. Ask clarifying questions. 2. Come up with the right algorithm and/or data structure that would optimally solve the problem for you. 3. Code up the solution in a programming language of your choice. And 4. Analyze and explain the time and space complexity of your solution. So how do you prepare for these? The most popular website to practice these questions is called LeetCode. On LeetCode, there are thousands of these coding questions for you to practice for free. I don't recommend that you randomly pick questions to practice. Instead, I recommend that you are intentional with which questions you want to practice. For this, I recommend a free tool called Grind75. This is a tool that lists 75 of the most popular questions and helps you manage your time to plan how many questions you need to study to complete the full 75 question list. The topics covered by these questions include strings and arrays, graphs and trees, heaps and queues, and dynamic programming, which people struggle with the most. But like with everything else, these questions can be conquered with enough practice. After going through the Grind75 question list, the best thing that you can do next is to look up a list of questions most commonly asked at the company that you're interviewing at. There are tons of lists online, so a simple Google search for this company should suffice. Now, here's some tips. For each question, make sure you time yourself. Don't spin your wheels, and once the timer runs out, look at the solution. If you did not get the answer optimally, implement it again. Make sure that before your coding interviews, you're doing a few practice problems out loud, as these questions require you to explain and talk through your thought process to the interviewers. Also, it's important that you do some practice problems without knowing the difficulty level and category of the question ahead of time. There are several browser extensions that can mask this information on LeetCode. If you're going for machine learning engineering roles, coding interviews are very much required, and I would recommend that you spend the bulk of your time preparing for coding interviews. If you're going for a role at a large tech company like a FAANG, to feel ready, I would recommend that you're able to solve 2 medium LeetCode questions or 1 hard LeetCode question in the span of that same amount of time. However, if you're going for data science roles, then I would not recommend spending the bulk of your time on coding interviews, especially if those data science roles are at FAANG companies. Data science interviews also can include another type of coding question, that being SQL puzzles. These are becoming less and less popular nowadays, but it's still important that you are comfortable with SQL. If you're prepping for data science interviews, instead of LeetCode, I recommend using a specific data science prep website. Examples of data science specific prep websites include Scratch, which has a free tier, and Interview Query, which has paid tiers. If you are interviewing for machine learning engineering roles, you will often be asked what is called a machine learning system design question. These questions are open-ended and have many correct answers. If you're familiar with the concept of system design interviews for software engineers, these are similar but with a machine learning focus. Examples of a machine learning system design interview question would be, how would you design the YouTube algorithm? How would you design a fraud detection system for online marketplace listings? And design a recommendation system for an e-commerce website. I will link a GitHub repo that lists several popular machine learning system design interview questions in the description below. Okay, so how do you prepare for machine learning system design interviews? The interviewers here are looking to gauge your experience with this kind of work. So the best way to prepare is to draw from your experience. If you're new to machine learning or machine learning engineering, then your best bet will be to read as much as you can on production level machine learning systems. You can find many of these on company blogs. The more you read of these kinds of articles and blogs, the better understanding you will have of machine learning systems, and the better you'll perform at a machine learning systems interview. When you practice doing about 5 to 10 machine learning system design questions by yourself. Give yourself about 40 to 45 minutes. Also, if you can, try to find a buddy and do a practice question with them. When practicing, follow these steps. 1. Often these questions are very vague, so you're going to want to come up with a list of clarifying questions you would ask your interviewer. 2. Start with a simple solution first. For example, use a support vector machine instead of a 2-tower deep learning model. And 3. Communicate your results clearly. Make sure you talk about all parts of the data cycle, from the data pipelines to your feature engineering, to how are you going to train your model, to productionization, to keeping your models fresh and online. And remember, there are many right answers. Just be prepared to defend your answer. And if you bring up any technique, then be prepared to explain in detail how your technique works. For example, if you suggest using support vector machine, then your interviewer will almost certainly ask you how a support vector machine works, what are the advantages and disadvantages of a support vector machine, and also why are you suggesting to use a support vector machine. Now, data scientists, especially at large companies, will also have an open-ended style interview. These are called the data science business case interviews. For data scientists, these interviews are going to be the most prevalent ones, and you can expect multiple rounds of business case interviews, including possibly phone screen business case interviews where they'll ask you to solve a mini business case over the course of 10 to 15 minutes. Examples of business case questions include, how would you measure driver satisfaction for a ride-sharing app? How would you measure the success of a social media TV product? How would you investigate the decline in the number of comments per user for a popular YouTube channel? Now, how to prepare for data science business case interviews. First, you're going to want to use a data science specific prep website. And on these sites, you're going to want to do as many questions as possible. When you practice, like with ML system design interviews, Try practicing out loud. Make sure you always start by coming up with a list of clarifying questions. A typical data science business case answer has the following structure. 1. Exploratory data analysis. 2. Data preprocessing. 3. Feature engineering or feature selection. 4. The actual modeling. 5. Model evaluation and metrics. And 6. Productionization of your model. Most importantly, during your data science business case interview is that you communicate very clearly, as clear communication is one of the key skills for data scientists at a large tech company. Finally, we get to the behavioral interview. Behavioral interviews are typically non-technical interviews that assess your ability to work with others and culture fit. For example, at Google, this would typically be called the Googliness interview. For this kind of interview, you'll get questions such as, describe a time when you resolved a conflict with a teammate. Describe a time when you had to make a critical pivot from a project. Name a time that you received harsh feedback. How did you respond? I wouldn't spend too much of your overall interview prep time on behavioral interviews, but behavioral interviews are definitely something that you should not neglect. For the behavioral interview, I would strongly recommend familiarizing with the STAR method, standing for situation, task, action, response. Let's go over what each part means. S stands for situation, meaning set the scene, describe what is happening and the proper context to your interviewer. Task, describe the problem at hand that you're trying to solve. Action, describe the steps that you're taking to solve this problem. And R, resolution, describe the outcome. What did you learn? Or what positive results came about from the actions that you took? To prepare for behavioral interviews, I would strongly recommend practicing on a few popular behavioral questions and replying with the STAR method. It helps to actually have an outline ready at hand. If you get a question about a situation you never experienced, your best bet is to be honest with the interviewer and instead reply with how you would respond in that given situation. Now some final considerations and tips before your interview. Practice with a buddy at least once before a final round interview. When practicing, don't spin wheels on problems. Look at solutions, and if you don't get the solution, go back and solve it again. Don't focus on perfectionism. You don't have to know everything. If an interviewer asks you about some algorithm that you don't know, it's okay to be honest and tell them that you are not as familiar as you'd like to be. And the interviewer will ask you about something else. When studying, it's good to have the mindset that you're not just studying for an interview, but you're actually learning and getting better along the way. There are a lot of great paid resources that you're more than welcome to try out. However, you don't need to spend a penny to prepare for your interviews, as there are tons of equally as good free resources, many of which I'll link in the description below. Remember, in this case, YouTube is your friend. If there's a coding question or a system design question or a business case interview question that you're not so sure about, search on YouTube, and there are likely going to be tons of videos on this platform walking you through your answer. At your interviews, don't dive right in. It's okay to tell your interviewers that you need to take a few minutes to think about the problem and think about the solution. During the interview, always talk your interviewer through your thought process, and if your interviewer gives you hints, take them. If you made it to this point in the video, congratulations. You took the first major step in your interview prep journey. Knowing what you need to know. I know this can seem overwhelming, especially if you're interviewing for your first role, but just take it one step at a time. And no matter what happens, you always get second chances, whether it's at the same company or a different one. Most importantly, believe in yourself. I'll be rooting for you. If you found this video helpful, then I'd love it if you subscribed. And if you know anyone who is prepping for their machine learning interviews, then please share this video with them. I would love to help them out as well. And if you have questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'll respond to every single one of them. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next one.